Good evening and welcome everyone to Happy Hour with me. It is Eileen Cook. It's February 5th. I know the date because it's my dad's birthday. So happy 79th birthday to my dad, who's of course not listening to any of this, but I like to think he knows I care. So that'll work. So Tony, you brought up the question today. So do you want to start us off and tell us what you were thinking about?
Yeah, so I've got some dialogue between three people, three of my characters, and they're all in conflict in one way or another. And as I the first way I went through it, I had these sort of people talking, but I was worried that I didn't have enough sort of texture and sort of adjectives to show the anger or the conflict, other than just the pure dialogue. And I wasn't sure even if I'd got that done very well. So that's why I was asking for have a look through.
So he sent me pages, brave soul. So we're going to tackle those. But one of the things that, I sort of looked at and did some sort of looking at was thinking about how to do that. So, we sort of sometimes do things instinctively. So thinking about it. So one of the exercises I came across online, which was from another writer, where they said, pick a scene, set a timer. I love a good timer. And they're like, for 5 minutes, just write down what the character wants intellectually. And then for another 5 minutes, time yourself and write down what the character wants emotionally, and then write the scene. Or then rewrite the scene and take a look at it, so that you're just sort of taking a moment to kind of think about what it is. And I've talked to people before that I think sometimes when revising, one of the things that I'll do is I'll write in the margin what emotion the character is thinking or going through, just to see if it's showing up on the page. So I know what I want it to be in my mind, but then so if I write in the corner or on the side of the page that the character's feeling anger, first I push myself, like, is it anger, or are they livid, or are they enraged, or are they annoyed, or are they frustrated? So I try and kind of really narrow down what that emotion is, and then I try to see if I have it on the page. And, one of the things to think about is actually 93% of communication, in theory, at least, is nonverbal. So dialogue is only part of what we're trying to put on the page. So we're going to look at that. So I'm going to, with your okay, Tony, which I know I have it because you sent it to me, you foolish man. I'm going to share some of Tony's pages here. So hopefully people can see. So Tony has turned in a scene where David, who's his main character, has taken an interview at this company. And he's, David, for those of you who don't know, is sort of, I guess you'd call him a spy, wouldn't you?
Yes.
A reluctant spy?
Yeah. In this scene, he is, yeah.
And so he had accepted a job where he placed some listening devices within this company. They used him to get in, but while he was there, he actually decided to go ahead and take that job that he was being interviewed for. So the people that are with him are a little bit angry. So Fitz, I would describe as his handler. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And Westlake is sort of Fitz's boss.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to take us in here. There we go. So you took the job. Fitz raised his eyebrows. And you had here, David thought he sounded like his father when he said he wanted to take dance lessons. I loved that line because I have a pretty good sense about how David's dad felt about dance lessons.
Right.
But by adding something like David's jaw tightened, he sounded like his father, like that makes it perfectly clear what that emotion is. Like he's annoyed and he's irritated that Fitz is sort of second guessing him. And another type of, you'll see mostly what I added was kind of nonverbal kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So using the protocol he and Fitz had worked out, he made several detours before he arrived at Fitz's hotel. I did. David stood straighter because he's proud, right? Like he is happy that he got this job. It's $150,000 a year. And he's pretty damn proud about it. And he's kind of sticking it to him because I'm guessing they didn't pay him no $150,000 for what he was doing. So I want to show that he's feeling a little bit posturing, a little bit, that's right. They did offer me that job.
Yep.
And then you'll see here, like, Fitz is pacing around the room. I really like this, looking like he might have a stroke. How could you agree to that? You shouldn't have done that. David doesn't understand why Fitz is mad. A contract to teach ballet is harmless enough. He placed the bugs. He did his job. It's not like he had many options to choose for them. You could push that even further. Like, easy for them. They've got these cushy government jobs with pensions and all this kind of stuff, or corporate jobs, I guess you'd call them. And he's got nothing, right? So I think to some degree what you want to set up in here is he feels a tiny bit used.
Yeah.
So they call him up when they want something. They have him do something. I mean, he could have gotten caught placing those things. And now they're going to be pissed at him because he's taken a job where he can make money. Screw that. So adding a little bit in there along that. So then, of course, then we have Westlake is a little bit different, because Westlake, I think, is not so sorry that he took the job, because he's already starting to figure out how he can use that to his advantage. So I'm trying to show that he's just a little bit annoyed where he does the Westlake side,
right,
doing that kind of thing.
Right.
Then they're talking about what they think the company has done. So we're getting a little bit of backstory there. David looked at Westlake and saw his bad eye track differently when he was lying. Or maybe he just wanted to believe he had Westlake figured out. Again, I wanted to add just a little bit where David's interior thought and what he's going. We get a little bit more about what the encryptions are. You'll see I added a David snapped, because I want, again, to make it really clear that he's getting more and more angry as the scene is going on. And I really liked, you had this line, David turned away from Westlake and tried to quell the urge to strangle him long enough to straighten out his crazy eye and wipe the smile off his face. I can tell other people like it because they're smiling as I read it out loud. But what we're seeing is, again, like, just that anger is there. And I think that's coming through really there. And here I just had some interior thoughts. So David crosses his arms over his chest. So again, a nonverbal where he's sort of closing himself off. And then just the interior thought, screw this.
Yeah, I like that.
I'd like the rest of my money. I've completed my contract. So he gets his money and he leaves. He'd had enough bullshit for the day. So then we have Westlake and Fitz remaining in the room. It's just some nice description. So I wanted to point that out. And in this one, a couple times I got a little confused about who was talking. So we'll get into that for a second. Okay. So Westlake's like, what are you going to do? And I like the term he uses here, the boy, because for clarity, although David is younger, he's certainly not 16. So it's a very good word choice because it's very dismissive.
Yeah.
Westlake is a little bit surprised that Fitz isn't going to do anything. And I showed that Fitz didn't turn away from the window, because I think we're just showing that he's sort of detached from this discussion. So they have connected. So they're looking at basically the things that are coming around. We're getting a little bit of backstory about what's happening. I added Westlake looked like he wanted to pet the laptop, because I just sort of love the image of him as like a Dr. No kind of guy with his hairless cat.
Yeah.
Sort of kind of moment where he's doing that. And I get the sense that Fitz is annoyed with Westlake.
Yeah.
So Westlake, I want to show that he's being very casual, like he's just shrugging, like any insight's better. And then this interesting thing happens, because Westlake says, oh, we had this guy who agreed to help us, and he went over to Japan, and then we never heard from him again. And he's very casual about that. And Fitz is sort of like, I want to show, like, he raises an eyebrow. It's like, so is he still in Japan? Oh, we don't know. He spooked off or was bought off. Like, he's basically disappeared. I think you want to show that Fitz is really annoyed. Like, leave it to Westlake to not give a shit once someone stopped being helpful to him.
Right.
Just so that it's clear, like, because I think for the reader, at least for me, I'm like, this guy didn't just disappear in Japan. Like, my hunch is he's chopped up and in cement someplace. Mm-hmm. Something bad happened. again, just trying to show that Westlake's just very uninterested. Like he's just fiddling with his computer. Like he can't even be bothered to have this discussion, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying, oh yeah, no, we were going to help his dad out. Well, what happened to his dad? Oh, I don't know. He got released. Nothing happening there. And Fitz is like, that's too convenient. Then the only thing I wasn't sure you had here, the tech typed something on the keyboard. So is the tech in the room with them?
That might be, I think, an original scene, the original part of it, that yet there was somebody in the room, but I think they're remote now, so I'll have to change that.
Yeah, so that was just because if so, then I would make it clear that the tech was in the room the whole time, because that will change the conversation they're going to have in front of him.
Yeah.
The conversation's Japanese, we're converting to English, so who necessarily is saying that? Mm-hmm. And then anything important. Fitz hated to give Westlake the satisfaction of asking, but he wanted to know. So something like that, again, where we see that there's this irritation and annoyance between them. So how does that feel for you?
That's good. That's good. And so I feel that I was getting close. Which is, it's the forest and trees thing, right? It's you're so close to the writing. But yeah, no, the small things that you're reading my mind on what was going on. So that was good. I like the edits on that.
Well, and I'm not reading your mind, for the record. I'm reading what you actually had on the, just in case people are like, wow, she's good. I'm reading like what you had was there. Like, right. I think that's what I think shows through really clearly is there's nothing that I've changed where you're like, oh no, that is not at all what I wanted to come through. So I was picking up on the emotion that you had. I'm just kind of trying to drive it home.
Sure.
And I think that the biggest thing you'll see in most of those cases, what I drove it home with was adding nonverbals.
Right. Great.
So what I would encourage other people is to realize that both the other people in the room are going to be noticing those nonverbals, but so are the readers. Because whether we think about it or not, we are very well trained to sort of pick up on those kinds of things. So some things to think about when you're trying to kind of layer that emotion or texture in is thinking about opposites. So does what the person says match with what their body is doing? So if you want to set up something interesting, you can definitely set that up where we see them say one thing, but the way that they're saying it or their body language while they're saying it sends us a very different message. And I think for readers, that becomes that automatic, intriguing thing. And we sometimes talk about, with writing, what you're trying to do is raise a question, right? So if I say something like, I love you, Eileen said, madly twisting the rings on her finger, makes someone be like, there's something going on there. Like she seems anxious or nervous. Or if I say, I love you with my arms crossed, or, Eileen, I love you, her shoulders drooped. Like that sounds defeat. There's something about that that's for the reader is going to make them go like, well, that's weird or that's odd. So that will help. Some things to think about sometimes is personal distance. So our characters, like, does someone step really close to someone? That could be potentially threatening, or it could potentially be a romantic move, right? Like, and again, like if you've ever had those kind of, first date signals, it's that thing where you're kind of like, you're very aware, like, my thigh is only 3 inches from his thigh in the movie theater. And you're just kind of just this creeping slightly closer. Or conversely, if you've had a difficult discussion and you feel like someone is trying to intimidate you, they'll often step into your personal space as a way of almost, or they'll stand up or they'll sort of loom over you. So again, if you're trying to show that someone is posturing or taking some kind of dominance movement, you might think about what they're doing. Or conversely, if your character is feeling threatened, you might have them, take a few steps back or move towards the door or break eye contact. So for example, in Tony's scene, he has a moment where Fitz is looking out the window, and I really felt like that was Fitz trying to calm himself down. Like that idea of, I'm just going to take a moment because if I'm looking at your face, I'm going to want to hit it. So it's that idea of kind of distancing yourself. Thinking about things like, people's bearing or posture. So, as you're describing them, like, are they standing with their legs spread and kind of, standing in that power stance? Have you guys ever heard the Superman TED Talk, right? So everyone's going to stand there and kind of get their Superman on for a moment. But thinking about that, or, is your head bowed or are you looking away? Will kind of telegraph if someone is feeling confident or not confident. So that will help. You can think about voice. So I think you want to use these sparingly. But, that idea about, like, are they saying something in a flat tone? Are they saying something very quietly? And you can also look at how the words are. So, like, are there, well, I, ... Guess I could do that if you wanted me to. So you're sort of showing that maybe there's a hesitation, or they're rushing through and they're talking really quickly. And you can almost sort of see that tension in how fast they're speaking. I know I've told a few people the story. I am not a good liar. I am on the page. I'm really good in that sense, but not so good in real life. And if I have to lie in real life, I'm very, very bad at it. And I was coming across the border once, and I had forgotten to declare a pair of shoes that I was wearing. And I just forgot them. And I actually had room on them. It's not like I would have been over and even owed duty on them. I just had completely forgotten. And so we were standing in the customs hall, and the customs person said, "Oh, I like your shoes." And I looked down and realized that I hadn't declared them. And I suddenly felt consumed with guilt because I would never make it as an international criminal. And so I began to be unable to stop talking. So I was like, these shoes, I've had these shoes forever. I got these shoes like 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember when I got them. I think it was Metrotown. Yep, I'm pretty sure it was Metrotown. You know how it is? You go into Metrotown and there's like the two different sides. And I went to the one side by the theater, where the theater was, and they were on sale. I remember that. They were on sale, but I can't remember what I paid for them. And at the same time, my husband was going like, like, and I'm pretty sure she thought I was but like, I just kept embroidering this lie instead of just saying, "Oh, I forgot to declare these," or just "thank you," which would have been an also perfectly appropriate answer to the nice customs lady. So if you wanted to show that someone is a really, crappy liar, you might look at how they go about that. Are they, kind of rushing through things? Are they doing that, and being aware that we don't always have control of that. If you've ever had your voice crack when saying something really emotional, those kinds of things will help. You can think about facial expressions, because again, people are thinking about that. So are people raising an eyebrow, furrowing a brow, doing something like that, making whatever that was that Bonnie just did. I don't know what we'd call that face. Something like that, where we might see something and we would think to ourselves like, okay, there's something going on there. That was a smirk. You got to work on your smirks, Bonnie. I think we could do that a little bit more. So you'll see things like eyes might darken, a face might redden, they might set their jaw, bite their lip, narrow a gaze. Nostrils may flare, which always makes me think of horses, but it does work. Those are kinds of things that you'll see that where you can sort of get an idea. And if you're thinking about it, look and watch a television show with the sound off, where you can't hear what the dialogue is, and see how much of it you can get from watching the actors. In an ideal world, you're doing it when you can watch it twice in a row. So maybe a show that you have, put on your PVR, and watch it first without the dialogue, being able to hear it, and just look at kind of what you're taking it away and why you think, for example, whatever you think is going on. If you think the characters are being angry at each other or confused, like, what was it that the actor did that gave you that impression? And then you can also play with it, because you can also sometimes put on subtitles, so you're actually seeing the dialogue. And then again, take a look and see like what is in the dialogue. So sometimes you can download the script and just see what it is from that gives you sort of a sense. And that will help you out. And you will start seeing that it's all those pieces usually working together. So it's the actor's interpretation, which you get to do on the page, and it's the dialogue. And it's also then lastly kind of how they're saying it. Think about how people talk with their hands. Have been working very hard myself at training myself to do less of this because I used to be a big hand talker. But I now will often, if you catch me speaking, you'll see I'll lace my hands together because I'm working on not doing that. But is someone pointing? Are they clenching their hands into fists? Are they pounding the table? Are they holding their hands up in surrender? Are they throwing their hands up in resignation? I don't think actually anyone twiddles their thumbs, but potentially you could twiddle your thumbs. So anything like that will sort of add to that, that might give that. Think about how characters move within the space. So they might get up and kind of, move across the room or push away from the desk. So that kind of thing might be also something that will show some emotion. They might be doing something really over the top. So they might be, for example, throwing something that will definitely display some emotion. So, if you're throwing something, you definitely have an emotional beat behind that. So thinking about if there's something like that. They throw a punch. That, for example, would be another example of a movement that would be kind of that. So you're kind of thinking about what they might physically do in all of those different circumstances. So I've been blathering for a little while. Thoughts or questions about that? How are other people adding emotion, or how do you sort of tackle it to see if you have emotion in there? You're all going to be quiet on me now, aren't you?
Adding the internal reaction, the emotional reaction, as an internal thought was a big one for me. I actually have a friend who I wasn't sure how to help him because he said, I know I'm doing this, but I don't know what's wrong with it. And he had always a physical thing. They raised their eyebrows and then the dialogue. And he coughed before responding. So it was their way of, especially in a group of teams, of showing which team was speaking. But it was every single dialogue had a physical reaction. And I was like, I don't know. I know that you're supposed to be doing this. And said would be wrong. But it wasn't until I got the connection of adding that kind of internal reaction that I was able to offer any sort of help. It's one of those things that you can't help someone with something you don't know yourself yet until you learn it.
Well, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what it is that's what's going. And I think that's also the idea of varying what you're doing. So you might use a physical thing for one thing. You might talk about a tone of voice in another thing. You might use a facial reaction in another, and you might do an internal thought for another one. So you're sort of breaking those up. And also thinking, have I already set the tone for that character? Maybe I don't need to stress again that they're feeling angry. Maybe that's already pretty clear, and I can, move this along in terms of pacing so that you still have the pacing going back and forth. One of the most common pieces of writing advice is always show, don't tell. Which I think is super valid, but I think it sometimes comes at the cost of sometimes it's okay to tell. And so sometimes to have a character who is thinking about what's going on for them and sort of internalizing what that means, or maybe thinking about why they have that reaction. So that might be a place where you're wanting to put in something like backstory. So we're seeing someone be like, Eileen knew that she was upset because that was the kind of comment her mom would make. It was unfair to blame Bonnie. Bonnie didn't even know her mom, but, and then it'd have a little bit of, a few lines about whatever that tension was, which by the way, I don't have, but I could with my mother, where, you're trying to slip in a little bit of that backstory and have that be a relevant piece of the pie, which might help someone kind of understand what it is that they're tackling and doing. So that will work. Susan.
That show don't tell thing it really shut me down quite often until I rephrased it into describe but don't explain.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I find that very helpful because you want more information. You just don't want to spell it out like the reader's stupid, right? To tell them what to interpret. But describe more so they can get it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of kind of reframing that. Is that idea of, yeah, you're wanting to make sure that the reader has a clear picture. Leslie, you had a thought. No, you don't have a thought anymore?
No, I just really love that explanation. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Susan.
So yeah, I think too often we get caught up in the idea, and sometimes I know we have talked about the idea of we almost sometimes lose pacing because we feel like we have to show all of these various things, and the reader will pick it up much clearer, or you can just shorthand something and sort of summarize what's going on for a character without going into all of that detail, especially if it's a fast-paced scene and you're trying to show, like, I think in Tony's scene, we have 3 different characters talking. They all have sort of an agenda that they're going on. We want to stay closest to David's point of view because he is our main character. So we're going to get the most from him, and so from him, I'm really wanting to get his sense of irritation and frustration. And again, when you think about the situation that he's in, here's a young kid, he's being asked, like, he could have had a line in there somewhere where he's like, he was the one who took all the risk. He was the one, if he got caught placing those bugs, was going to be in deep shit at that company, not anybody else there. And then they have the balls to tell him that he shouldn't have taken a job that he's eminently qualified for, that pays him more than what they pay him. So you can kind of see where, he would be annoyed. And yet for the reader, I also understand, like they're asking him to place bugs because this is probably not a great place to be. And that he's possibly not making the best decision, and that he's possibly being used even, because that is an awfully well-paying dance instructor position, right? So the reader's going to be making some limits there, but we'll go along with it because we understand where that character is coming from. So using that as an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into the character's point of view will help quite a bit. Other people's thought on kind of adding texture.
I don't know, I'm trying to think. I think I have too many internals, like on some of my scenes where, I think because I'm trying to introduce his characters, there's dialogue, and then there's why was she the family matriarch? Because, why were they asking her to do this? Because she was the middle child, and why does she have to be in charge and take care of everybody and arrange everything, So I'm not really sure. Like one of my critique partners said that I had too much telling, and I think it's like that internals, and I'm trying to figure out where that line is between the dialogue, the internals, and the telling. So like a really close point of view, and then telling, getting to too much telling. And you can't answer that without looking at anything, but that's what I'm struggling with.
So one thing is, I am open to doing like what we did with Tony. If you ever want to submit some pages and sort of talk about, specifically in this case, Tony was asking about dialogue and how to add emotion to dialogue. So if you had a specific question like how much is too much internals, that's always a way for us to tackle it, is send me some pages, as long as you're open to having other people take a peek at those. I think one of the things that can sometimes be interesting is, and you've probably seen this exercise before, is if you have a dialogue scene, take out everything but the dialogue for a moment. And first take a look and be like, can you sort of tell who is talking just from what's being said or how it's being said? So everything from sort of word choice and so forth. And that's something, we could look at again with Tony's piece, which is, is there something else that would set Westlake and Fitz apart in terms of how they talk? That might be something else that could add sort of a texture to that. When you're looking at, adding internals that are providing information, one of the things is saying, how much of that do I need in this particular scene? How much does the character or does the reader need to know for that scene to make sense to them? And potentially it's a case of, taking some out and leaving others in, because it is a balance. I think you use that word, and that's a really good way to sort of think about it, which is what's the balance between narration, dialogue, internal thought, setting. Because one of the things we didn't really talk about in Tony's piece is there's a bit of setting. We're in a hotel, but we could certainly go back and add and look through with Tony's and see, like, are there places where we could amp up the setting, right? So, you know, when Fitz is standing in front of the window, are these floor to ceiling windows? Because we know that we're looking out over the city. So does it look like he could, you know, jump at any moment? Or does he look like, you know, the master of his domain? Or is it dark outside and his reflection is in there? Is it, you know, a very sterile hotel room? Or is it, for example, if it's a really quite posh hotel, how does that make David feel to be in this space where, you know, a hotel room with 500, you know, thread count sheets and all this? How dare they talk to him about? So you could use this setting as another way of sort of adding some texture to that scene that we didn't really talk about. And, you know, we've talked before about setting, but thinking about that as another way of sort of amplifying what's going on in that particular moment.
Do you, when you're going through your pages of your own stories, do you have a checklist that you go through? Well, I've got to add setting and I've got to add this, or do you just sort of virally or organically change it?
You want a spreadsheet, don't you, Tony?
No, I don't want a spreadsheet.
Yes,
No,
you do.
no,
Yes, you do. I can see it in your eyes.
How do you do it, Eileen?
Of course, probably not surprising to those who know me, is I don't have a spreadsheet. There is online in our free resource room, I think there's an edit checklist where I have put through different things that I eventually am sort of looking through. But I am kind of going through and sort of trying to figure out what's missing or what might add to it. And I think it's always that good reminder for some people is it often takes me, you know, several rounds of revision to get those things in there. Because as you can see, you know, I read Tony's pieces yesterday and I added all these nonverbals partly because I was thinking about that. And it wasn't until we were sitting here that I was like, yeah, setting. We could use more of a setting. And now, you know, I almost want to pull them back up and be like, okay, where's some places we could go back and add a couple setting details to that, which obviously clearly didn't occur to me the first time that I read those pages. So I think it's always that case of being willing to kind of go back, because kind of once you add one piece, then you're sometimes able to see what else is happening. Yeah, layers is a good way to think about it. Yeah. Way to go, Bonnie. So thinking about that idea of, you know, kind of doing one round and then kind of going back and seeing if something's missing. But you probably could make a spreadsheet of that if you wanted.
No, I like the idea of a checklist. And what my first, just funny from a process point of view, the first draft of this was that they came back and they had a nice conversation, and they were Fitz and Westlake were part of this, and he continued on and kept on sort of doing intelligence for the company. And as I was going through this edit, I said, no, it's actually been more powerful if he cuts them off. It says, you know, screw you. Give me my money. I'm done now.
Yeah.
Right. But that didn't occur to me until I'm going through the edit process. Right. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a much stronger conflict. Right.
And I think we too often do that. We are not as willing to kind of put some conflict in there that we want to have, like that will make it, you know, just amp it up. And, you know, Buzz Bonnie put in the chat window, all too often in the first drafts, everything happens easy. That, you know, the character looks around the room and it's like, oh, there's that thing that I need. Oh, there's the clue that will solve everything. And they don't have to do anything to get it. Or the characters agree with him, like, I need you to do this. And the other character goes, okay. And of course, you know, while that might even happen in real life, although it's unfortunately not often enough in my experience, it's more interesting if they have to struggle and push against those kinds of things. So thinking about how you can layer in that conflict. And you can see that this scene, if they were all in agreement, so if he's going and he's saying, yeah, I placed the bugs, and they're like, yeah, great, well, now you'll be inside, and here's some background information on the company and why we think it's shady. Yeah, well, I'll keep a good eye out on that. that doesn't have the same kind of friction as when you see that, David's going to take this job and he thinks he's doing kind of an FU to them. But I have a feeling Westlake is like, that's perfect. Like, I'm thrilled you're taking that job. I can think of nothing better than for you to be on the inside, and I'll figure out a way to use that once I have my, things together. So you sort of see characters acting and reacting against each other.
There was years ago at Surrey, when Jennifer Cruzy and Bob Mayer were there, they talked about conflict boxes. So I always start my scenes that way. And it's like you have whatever your scene protagonist and your scene antagonist. So there's always like one person who may not be your story antagonist, but who's the conflict in that scene. And then for each character, you say like what that person's goal is and what their action is. And then you look at the other character, and whatever their goal and action should be, they should be like at cross purposes. So I always think about that when I'm starting a scene, and it kind of helps me avoid doing that thing where you walk into the room, you pick up the key to the locked door, and that's what you were looking for.
Aha, the key, the very key I was seeking. How fabulous. Yeah, and so you'll often see that conflict box comes up in Deborah Dixon's book, Goal, Motivation, Conflict. I don't know if anyone has seen that book. It was out of print for a while, and I think it's come back, which is quite nice. I know it's definitely an ebook now. And you'll sometimes hear the term, people will say, what's your GMC? And that's just a way like we all feel like we have fancy little slang. That's goal, motivation, conflict. And she uses that term conflict block or conflict cross in that book as well. So it's the idea that there's something that I want in the scene. There's something that Susan wants in the scene. And we may even want the same thing. So we're competing against each other for that. That's kind of the most obvious type of conflict block. But it may be I want A, Susan wants B, but my pursuit of A is going to get in the way of Susan's pursuit of B. So even though we don't want the same thing, we're going to brush up against each other because we're doing that. So this is often where misunderstandings and various things can sometimes come in, where we're seeing things blocked. And again, if you're thinking about nonverbals and thinking about, when I talk about backstory, is thinking about the meanings that people put on what other people say. So if you are an insecure teenager and you come down the stairs and you've spent the past 4 hours trying on absolutely every piece of clothing that you have, and you have picked just the right thing, and you finally got your hair to stand down so you don't have antenna like some people in the room. And then all of a sudden you get to the bottom of the stairs and your dad says something like, you're going to wear that? And you explode, right? Or you storm out of the house, or you are upset. I mean, you may not even necessarily have a conflict in the scene, but you're clearly very agitated and upset about that. Because for you, what he's saying is, you're going to wear that, implying that there's something wrong with what you're wearing. And my dad always thinks that I dress too sleazy, and there's just that and the other thing. And so you're very upset. And in reality, your dad just might be thinking like, you're going to wear that? It's really cold out. I thought you'd want to wear something, that had long sleeves. Or I thought you were, can you hear my dog? This is the indication that some people feel it is the time for an evening meal. So that is the reminder that perhaps I am sliding down on my dog parenting responsibilities. It's okay. So thinking about, not only what is being said, but also how people are internalizing what is being said can be a great source of conflict, because we do put meanings on those things. At the risk of being a little bit stereotypical, women are a little bit more inclined to do this because we are often used to thinking about emotional layers and subtext. In some cases, men are not. So you'll see a situation where you'll see a woman and she's, slamming pots and pans around, and she's, clearly very agitated. The reader can tell that she's agitated. Her husband comes into the room and says, is anything wrong? And she slams the pot down on the stove. No, everything's great. And he's like, oh, okay, right? beer out of the fridge and goes, sits down in front of the game. And it's like, well, she said everything was fine. So, they're necessarily missing that subtext. So thinking about that is another way you can sort of layer conflict or another kind of different type of texture into a dialogue scene as to whether or not people are misunderstanding each other. So that's always a good opportunity for some conflict. For people who are all speaking the same language, we often do not communicate very well at all, and particularly across genders or age groups. So parents to kids and then to women and so forth, we sometimes are just at complete cross purposes. I thought, Tony, you were going to weigh in with the male perspective and be like, if you women would just say. He's like, nope.
You look lovely tonight, honey.
Good answer. Good answer. This is a man who has been married successfully more than a couple of years. Right. Other questions on adding texture to dialogue or the idea of explaining? And would you like chocolate with that? Excellent addition, Leslie. Very good. Some good, take notes on that, Tony. Write that down. Anyone else? Any questions for this evening?
I had something I was trying this afternoon. Maybe someone else has done this. Because it was, when you were talking about dialogue, this afternoon I was very frustrated with my manuscript. So I decided I was going to color it. So I got these different pens and I thought, okay, so I'm going to do, orange was for action scenes, pink was for in the head kind of thinking stuff, and green was for dialogue, and yellow was for setting. So I only started doing it, but then I wound up with this page. You see the pink on the edge? It's all pink. In the head. So I was like, I think I have a weakness here. So anyway, I've only started trying to do this afternoon, but actually it really brought it out because like when you were doing the dialogue scene, I thought, oh yeah, you've got the green color for whatever color you would be for dialogue, and then you put a little physical action in there. Just the colors would tell you to spice it up and put the variety in there. So has anybody done this successfully? Do they have a better color scheme? What did you do?
I have done that. And I have done it two different ways. I've done it both on the page, and then I've also done it on index cards for each chapter, where I'm sort of keeping track of, like, when do subplots show up? So I can see how often or when do characters show up. And so there is something about color that becomes a very visual indicator where you can sort of see something. And yeah, when you look at a page and you're like, this entire page is pink, that for you becomes that like, this is where I need to break this up in some way, shape, or form and change it up. And it just becomes a nice visual cue. In terms of what colors, I think it's whatever colors make you happy. Other than I would write somewhere on one page, pink equals this, orange equals this, just because there will be a point later where you'll be like, what in the heck was I meaning with that? And so it'll be a way to kind of keep track of what you did. And it really is about that idea of going all the way back to what Jenny said, which is finding balance with things. So finding that where you have some dialogue, because dialogue will pick up pacing, right? It will make things sort of hum along. Where you have a little bit of action so that people can see what's happening in the scene. It will visually intrigue them. And where you have some interior thought, so you can give us some understanding of what's happening within their head. Where there's a setting so they can see where they are. So having a chance to sort of, block out those things so we can see them will help you. And again, I often will do it on the big picture thing, which is, I mentioned the character Tony in scenes 2, 4, 5, and 6, and then he drops off the planet and he's not mentioned again until chapter 38. and which time I run the risk that the reader is like, what the heck happened to Tony? Who's Tony? Like, so, you know, whether or not at some point, even if he's not going to be in those scenes because he's not relevant to the action, that some character thinks about him, or there's some reference to what Tony might be doing, you know, offset kind of thing, so that the reader is reminded. Just for me, it becomes that, oh, right, that needs to be in there. And I've also done it with subplots, like where are the, you know, where's the romance coming in? Is it coming in on a kind of regular basis so we see it building? Or is it a thing where it just sort of drops in all at once? And so that can be another way of sort of thinking about it. All right. So tomorrow morning we have office hours again at 9 a.m. And I'm going to be actually talking about common terms in an agent's contract. So one of our fine members has had the call from an agent. So she's got a boilerplate contract from the agency, and she's trying to make sense of it and understand what the heck the thing means. And I think it's probably useful in general. So I'm going to kind of go over what are those common contract terms, what do they mean, what you should maybe think about some of them, and whether or not there's any of those you want to keep an eye out for that might not be in your best interest. So if people are free tomorrow morning, I would love to see you. All right. So until then, you all look lovely tonight, including you, Tony, and may you all have chocolate. And until then, I will see you guys around. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Eileen.